Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. We have someone coming to this Canada who says his name is Joe Bloggs, and he's an engineer from Columbus, Ohio. It's possible to ascertain with a high degree of accuracy whether this is true. If someone from supposedly from within Syria, someone in a refugee camp who says his name is Muhammad Ali, and he's this, that, or the other, I mean, the American officials have admitted outright, Syria is a failed state. We have no idea who these people are.
Right, and I think that's a point I make in the book, that while we do have Canadian officials over there, I have a good amount of faith in Canadian border security officials and citizenship and immigration officials. They are doing interviews. They are getting refugees that have been referred by the United Nations. But that said, it's very easy for people to sneak through the cracks. The Islamic State has said, without minced words, that they will infiltrate the refugees coming into Europe and North America with their agents, that they're intentionally planting agents that are going to come over here and try to inflict harm on us. And, we've read all kinds of reports from international reporters that Syria has lost control of its passport facilities, that they've been taken over by both the Islamic State and another Islamic terrorist group. So there's all kinds of problems with even whether or not the real passports may be fake, may be fakely produced. Then there's also a black market for real passports, originally engineered passports, and we saw that in the Paris attacks. Two of the suicide bombers were carrying Syrian passports. They were European nationals. They were Muslims who grew up in Europe, who then went to Syria to receive some kind of training and then came back through the refugee route. They claimed asylum in Greece. They were registered as refugees, and they made their way back to Paris under false identities, carrying fake Syrian passports. So we know that this is happening. We know that there are instances where, people who are sneaking in are falling in through the cracks. And I thought it was interesting. Just a couple of weeks ago, Kevin, an Auditor General report came out about citizenship and immigration, talking about all the fraud and all the problems, about how people with criminal records who shouldn't have been able to become Canadian became Canadian, how there were cases where where immigration officials weren't even double checking when people had flags on their accounts. So, you have a situation where there's all kinds of problems. Government is imperfect. There's all kinds of problems in the department.
Well, here's another problem for you. That, as you know, these UN High Commissioner refugee camps for Syrians are Sharia strongholds. There is no room for Christians there. And we are told that the vast majority of these Syrian refugees speak neither English nor French. A great many of them have no education whatsoever. In addition, according to their advocates, a great many of them suffer from profound mental problems. That being the case, and given the extraordinary cost, over $1 billion, of bringing actually not that many Syrian refugees here. I mean, that is to say, the cost per refugee is tremendous. Why aren't we spending this money in an attempt to build a better life for these people where they live, or at least close to where they come from?
I mean, that's another great question. It's been well documented. Jeffrey Johnson of the Kingston Whig Standard has written several reports documenting the discrimination and abuse that Christians face at these UN refugee camps, and that most Christians and most persecuted minorities in Syria just avoid the camps altogether, and they never register with the UN because the UN is in part employed by locals who have their own prejudices and their own problems. So you're absolutely right. Whereas the Harper administration previously used to sort of have a preference for persecuted minorities, and they went out of their way to help rescue Iraqi Christians who were being persecuted, as well as gays in both Iraq and Iran who were facing discrimination, persecution. The Trudeau preference is just to let in everybody or anybody, or the first 25,000 in the queue, without really looking at who's most in need, who's most in danger. And of course, it's a drop in the bucket. I mean, there's over 4 million refugees and displaced people just from Syria alone. And Syria is just one of the many conflicts going on around the world. So, our little targeted approach to bring people over to Canada, I think Trudeau's doing it sort of to make himself feel better so that he can get an applause line and that he can feel virtuous when he talks about it. But it's really not the best allocation of resources. It's not doing anything to help the vast, vast, vast majority of persecuted people in Syria, in around Syria, and the entire region.
Well, you mentioned something in the book which was new to me and quite fascinating, that it would seem that these Syrian refugees do not, in fact, want to come to Canada.
That was something that came up. It was National Post reported it in December that the UN contacted tens of thousands of people who are registered and asked them via text message whether or not they wanted to come to Canada. And the response rate of people who were willing to accept was incredibly low. It was in the single-digit percentage. I can't remember the exact number. I think it was 5 or 6%. Said that they were willing to come to Canada at that time. So, far from having our pick of the refugees, that would be best suitable for life in Canada, that might be most willing to be able to integrate into our society and find work and learn English and all these things. We're basically picking whoever will come, and that makes the odds a lot more dangerous, especially when you consider. I'll give you another example. A Lebanese cabinet minister who had knowledge of the UN camps in his country, in Lebanon, estimated that about 2% of the people in the UN camps registered with the UN were members of the Islamic State, were actually Islamic State agents. At 2%. Another British poll found that about 20% of Syrians were supportive of the Islamic State and supported its mission and thought that it had a good impact on Syria. So we're talking about 2% that may be part of the Islamic State and another 20% who have positive opinions of the Islamic State.